He mocked her because she was a waitress. He reached for her like she meant nothing. That was Dmitry Vulov's biggest mistake, because the woman he humiliated in front of the room wasn't just another server. She was the daughter of the ghost, the dead consigliere he helped frame, and she was carrying evidence that could turn 5 mafia families against him in a single night. By the time he realized who she was, it was already too late.
Eels. Picture this. An old man moves with terrifying, sudden grace. 1 second, a full glass of wine. The next, glass shatters across marble, and a waiter is pinned against the wall by a dead-eyed grip. The gilded obsidian drops into total silence. Eels. Security freezes. Billionaires suddenly forget how to breathe. But you and I, we're going to watch the shadows. Out of the dark, one person steps forward. A quiet, unseen waitress holding a bread basket. She speaks, Eels, reviving a dialect that's been dead for 40 years. Stick with me. The human tragedy we're unpacking tonight goes right to the bone. Eels. We all crave a place to belong. But the Gilded Obsidian wasn't just a restaurant. It was a brutal mirror, reflecting exactly where you stood in the city's food chain. Elena Rossi knew she belonged at the absolute bottom. Eels. She was there to serve the powerful, totally unseen. She drifted through the gold-plated room like a ghost, drowning in an oversized uniform. She hid behind her dark hair, using it as a shield against a world built on pain. By choosing to be a shadow, Eels, she found her only way to survive the night. Eels. She spent 23 years mastering the art of disappearing. Then, reality hits hard. Her manager, Arthur, barks at her to grab water and bread, snapping at her to look up from the floor. He grabs her shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise Eels, but she doesn't even blink. Taking the pain is just safer. Then he drops the news. The Moretti family is walking in events. He shoves her aside with a grim warning. If she messes up tonight, losing her job is the least of her worries. Eels, in a blood-soaked city, she'll just be erased. Eels. She just whispers yes. Arthur completely bans her from the VIP section, giving the Moretti table to the polished, confident servers. He sneers at her messy hair and bare face, mocking her total lack of grace, and orders her to stay out of sight. Eels. Elena nods, quietly swallowing her pride. But Arthur misses the point entirely. He doesn't see the heavy wisdom she carries. In a room packed with absolute predators and mob bosses, turning into a piece of the furniture isn't a weakness. Eels. It's the only real way someone like her makes it home in one piece. Eels. She grabs her pitcher and fades back into the dark, sinking into the survival tactics she's practiced since she was 7. Behind the swinging doors, the kitchen feels dead cold. The normally loud cooks are locked in total silence. Benoit, Eels. The head chef grips the steel counter, looking pale and terrified. He catches Elena's eye and whispers through his thick accent. The sun isn't the only one coming tonight. The real nightmare is walking through those doors, the patriarch himself. Eels. Don Salvatore Moretti. Eels. Time flatlines in the kitchen. A terrified line cook mutters that the old man was supposedly exiled in Sicily or dying in a bed somewhere. Benoit wipes cold sweat off his forehead. Guys like Salvatore Moretti don't just die. Eels, he murmurs. They just go down to manage hell. Panic floods the room. Benoit warns that one wrong grain of salt or a spilled water glass could be a literal death sentence. Through all the chaos, Elena calmly picks up a silver tray. Eels. Don't pour his drink with your left hand, she says quietly. Everything stops. The Don hates the left hand. Eels. It's an old superstition, she adds. The left hand belongs to the devil. She tells them to warn the server. Benoit just stares, completely lost, asking how a nobody like her knows mob secrets. Elena shrugs it off. Eels. Feeding him a cheap lie about reading history books. The real truth was buried way deeper. She remembered her grandmother whispering those dark stories in a freezing Brooklyn apartment, using a dead dialect meant for ghosts. Eels. Walking back to the dining room, she sees the fallout. Tech founders and finance guys are already fleeing, bolting into the night before dessert. Eels. Let's stop and unpack this power dynamic together. When an apex predator walks into the woods, the smaller animals just scatter. It isn't just fear, it's a raw survival instinct. You simply don't breathe the same oxygen as the boss. Eels. Elena quietly clears plates, eyes glued to the heavy doors. A suffocating knot forms in her chest. It's a sadness way heavier than panic, driven by the echo of her grandmother's warnings. Across the empty room, Arthur snaps his fingers, Eels, ordering her to vanish. She silently obeys, fading straight back into the dark wood. Eels. She dissolves right into the walls. That's the painful gift of being invisible. At 8 sharp, the heavy oak doors groan open. 4 silent muscle men walk in, blowing right past the host. Their dead eyes scan the room, heels, tracking exits and sizing up every patron. Satisfied, they step aside. Lorenzo Moretti walks into the light. The guy is massive, carrying a heavy gravity that practically forces the room to kneel. Dressed in sharp navy, his face is pure ice. Feels he has the devastating aura of a man raised in darkness. Feels he moves without a shred of doubt, walking like the ground was built for him. But the real nightmare is right beside him. The room isn't shaking because of Lorenzo. They're frozen by the fragile old man leaning on his arm. Don Salvatore Marti is half his son's size. Time has chewed him up, bending his spine and carving harsh lines into his face. Buried under a dark fedora and cashmere, he uses a wooden cane. But don't kid yourself. The cane is just a prop. Everyone breathing knows the ugly truth. Feels. This fragile old man once took a life with his bare hands on a busy street in 1979, calmly drinking espresso while the blood spread. His energy feels like a suffocating storm. The entire dining hall surrenders. Talking stops. Feels. Forks go down. People stop breathing. The silence is so heavy, Elena feels it pressing against her head. Sprinting gang over, Arthur bows deep enough to scrape the floor. He pours on the pathetic flattery. Feels. Swearing it's an absolute honor to host the Morettis, promising their table is ready. Feels. He guarantees a perfect night. Salvatore ignores him. The old man just grunts, his cane hitting the marble like a slow heartbeat. Lorenzo gives the manager one cold nod, politeness masking a promise of violence. Is the table ready? Lorenzo asks. Feels. Arthur scrambles, swearing it's the safest spot in the building. Lorenzo quietly tells him to lead. From her dark corner, Elena watches. She studies Salvatore's weary steps and tight grip on the cane. Feels. Realizing this broken man isn't holding on for balance, he's holding on to power. Feels. She watches his hollow eyes scan the room. That's a king looking over his stolen empire. Elena feels a haunting familiarity in his walk, pulled from the ghosts of her past. Her grandmother used to drink cheap wine at 2 a.m, feels, whispering that Salvatore walked like the whole underworld sat on his broken shoulders. Every step was collecting a blood debt. Elena grips her pitcher, telling herself to look away. But you and I both know what it's like to watch a train wreck, right? Feels. She just can't turn away. The Morettis finally take their table. Feels. The guards lock down the perimeter like a silent army. Lorenzo sits by his father, a dark prince tied to a bloody throne. The table is perfect. But in a brutal twist, Arthur sends Chad to serve them. Chad is a clueless kid who knows nothing about Sicilian mob rules. He approaches with goofy, bright energy, blind to the ancient monsters sitting there. Men who built empires of bone before he was born. From the dark, Elena watches this poor lamb walk right into the slaughter. Feels. Chad flashes a painful, customer service smile. Good evening, he chirps. Sparkling water? A massive, fatal mistake. Salvatore hasn't taken off his hat yet. In their world, nobody speaks until the boss uncovers his head. It's a blood rule, and Chad's broke it. Lorenzo clenches his jaw, pure violence boiling under his skin. Salvatore just stares at the waiter in dead silence. He isn't looking at a human being. He's looking at a broken toy making a noise that needs to stop. Feels. Chad starts drowning in panic. He stumbles through a weak apology, but Lorenzo coldly cuts him off, asking for still water in the wine list. But the kid keeps digging his grave, actually trying to upsell a Pinot Noir. Salvatore growls. Feels. Do I look like I drink Pinot Noir? He doesn't yell. He whispers it, a terrifying sound packed with decades of violence. Chad turns ghost white, shaking. The crime boss just raises a hand, dismissing him. Arthur drags the kid away, spitting curses. Feels. Throwing him out into the night. Feels. They send in Dominic, a seasoned server who supposedly knows how to handle Mafia elites. He steps up to pour the water, but he makes a fatal mistake. He pours from the left, watching from the coming house. Elena aches. Salvatore's hand snaps with terrifying out, crushing the man's wrist with terrifying speed. The Don growls that in his house, you pour with the right hand. Dominic just freezes, begging for mercy. Feels. Dominic stammers some pathetic excuse about restaurant policy. It is a fatal mistake. Salvatore drops his wrist in absolute disgust. He spits, warning them he is not some clueless tourist. Lorenzo reaches out. Feels. Desperately trying to soothe his father's wounded ego, but the mob boss is too far gone. He stands up, his heavy voice echoing off the walls. He damns the restaurant as plastic and entirely stripped of actual respect. Fake respect, he roars. Feels is just a hollow grave. Behind him, the enforcers shift, completely ready for war. Feels. You and I both know what a room feels like when it turns deadly. The manager is completely paralyzed. Hidden steel slides into the hands of the enforcers. Ordinary diners hold their breath, trapped in a cage with a wounded predator. Heals. Salvatore turns to leave, a departure that absolutely guarantees bloodshed. But then Elena moves. Stripping away her own terror, she slips into the kitchen. She takes the cheap, rustic staff bread hidden from the wealthy guests, heals, and grabs a simple bottle of olive oil off the cold shelf. Heals. No fancy truffle oil, just raw, earthly truth. She steps right into the heavy silence, her shoes clicking like a metronome against the floor. The manager glares at her with pure hatred, but the job means nothing at this point. Heals. She is answering a much deeper human call. Suddenly, a massive enforcer blocks her path. Built like a brick wall, he carries a vicious scar and the heavy hands of a killer. He stands between her and the grieving mobster, Heals, completely ready to destroy a young waitress over a simple basket of warm bread. Heals. Elena pauses, offering a slight tilt of her head. It is not surrender. It is a profound sign of underworld respect. She softly tells him she brought bread for the dawn. The enforcer studies her closely. No hidden weapons, no shaking hands. Heals. Just an ocean of calm. 3 agonizing seconds pass before he finally steps aside. Elena walks straight over to the table. Lorenzo immediately locks his dark eyes on her. He knows the hungry look of people chasing money. Heals. But her presence carries a completely different, grounding gravity. Heals. She stands at center stage, yet she seems to crave the shadows. That visual paradox hooks Lorenzo instantly. Meanwhile, Salvatore stews in his dark fury, practically breathing enough fire to start a street war. Elena ignores the heavily armed guards. Heals. She completely ignores the dangerous son. Her gaze anchors entirely on the broken boss. She sets the rustic bread down like a sacred peace offering. Pouring the oil, she reaches over and shifts his wine glass exactly 3 inches. Heals, aligning it perfectly with his knife. It is a quiet, devastating display of soft power. Heals. The manager groans from the shadows, just waiting for the blood to spill. Elena folds her trembling hands. She takes one deep breath before risking everything. The tension in the room hangs like a thick fog. Heals. She knows this moment is either her salvation or her absolute last breath. Bowing her head, she speaks the phrase, Vusenza beneda don turi, upani e cauru, mancha escordal di penny. This is not modern Italian. It is a buried mountain dialect. Heals, sung by forgotten peasants, to soothe the violent mafia lords of another lifetime. Heals. It means, bless me, the bread is warm. Eat and forget your sorrows. The energy shift in the room is haunting. Salvatore's rage simply evaporates into thin air. The ruthless crime boss looks utterly paralyzed. He is caught between pure shock and a deep, Heals, agonizing vulnerability. Seeing this hardened killer completely unravel is profoundly unsettling. He sinks back into his chair, staring at Elena as if she just walked out of a grave. Lorenzo goes rigid, Heals, watching a waitress deliver a sacred phrase meant only for the ghosts of elite mob legends. Heals. Stick with me here, because a suffocating silence takes over the room. What did you say? Salvatore whispers. The terrifying aura of the boss completely vanishes, leaving behind nothing but a deeply broken man. Elena speaks again. Heals. She matches the exact mournful rhythm her grandmother passed down, holding the syllables like fragile glass. She softly warns him that cold bread and hot anger invite the devil. Salvatore reaches for her, his calloused hand trembling violently. Heals. He stops inches away, terrified she might fade into smoke. His voice cracks, begging to know who taught her those buried words. Heals. My grandmother taught me, Elena answers. She switches back to English, but keeps that haunting, ancient cadence in her voice. Then she delivers a devastating truth. She tells him it is the only language meant for God, Heals, and for men who believe they are God. The silence in the restaurant completely transforms. The pure terror is gone, replaced by a heavy, ancient reverence. Lorenzo exhales sharply. He stares at this girl in her cheap uniform offering broken bread. Heals. For the first time, the calculated air is entirely lost in the dark, and he is totally mesmerized. Heals. The mighty Salvatore Moretti sounds like a drowning man grasping for air. What was her name? He asks. Elena stands right on the razor edge of her life. She could easily lie, vanish into the city, and keep her ghost story buried forever. Heals. But she looks at this feared kingpin and just sees a human being rotting from a lifetime of grief. His agony pulls at her soul, so she surrenders the truth. Grazia, she whispered. Grazia Vitali. That name detonates through the silent room. Heals. The grieving Don grips the heavy oak table just to stay upright. Heals. The blood entirely drains from his face. Grazia, he repeats, his mind tumbling 50 years into the dark past. The baker's daughter who vanished in 1974. Elena stands perfectly still. She looks at him and tells him directly, feels. She never vanished. She ran away to Brooklyn, baked for 3 decades, and passed away 3 years ago. Elena had lived this exact moment in her nightmares, never expecting it to become real. Then, a single tear falls from Salvatore's eye. Feels. Watching the ultimate crime lord weep in front of his lethal soldiers is a beautiful, deeply human tragedy. Feels. Lorenzo, the cold underboss, is entirely shaken by his father's tears. It feels like the earth has shifted beneath them. Salvatore takes the rustic bread, tearing the crust exactly the way Elena's grandmother used to do it. He dips it in the golden oil, feels, tastes it, and whispers that it tastes like home. He is literally conversing with the dead. Suddenly, his dark eyes snap open, locking right onto the trembling manager. The ruthless boss returns, radiating fierce protection. You, he growls. Feels. This girl serves no one tonight. She eats with my family. Feels. Arthur stumbles over his words, nervously citing restaurant policies about staff sitting with patrons. Lorenzo slowly turns around. He doesn't even raise his voice. He simply murmurs, Arthur, my father just invited a lady to dinner. Feels. Are you telling him no? The manager shrinks into a ghost and quickly retreats. Lorenzo quietly tells Elena to sit. She stands paralyzed. The heavy reality of the generational vendetta she just woke up is crashing down on her. Feels. She stepped out of the shadows, invoked the sacred dialect, and whispered a name buried in blood. Feels. The door back to her old life is permanently nailed shut. She mutters something about needing to finish her shift, but Lorenzo stands up. Up close, the young heir is a towering shadow. He smells of bitter tobacco and quiet violence. Feels. He pulls back the chair beside his father. It is clear he is not asking. Lowering his voice until it vibrates in her chest, he whispers, Elena, nobody refuses Don Salvatore. His gaze cuts right through her. No cheap charm, no hollow games. Just a pure, feels, dark obsession taking root, dragging her into the deep end. Feels. It is a quiet, deadly curiosity which is far more terrifying than a gun. Lorenzo leans in close. He questions how a young Manhattan whisperer speaks a dead Sicilian dialect from 1942. Elena stares at the empty chair. Her survival relies on reading the darkness in the room, and sitting with this crime family seals her fate. Yet, she glances back at the aging Don. He watches her like a priceless memory, dragged from the ashes, completely terrified that she might just fade away. Feels. She unties her apron, lets it fall to the floor, and takes her seat beside Don Salvatore. A collective, fearful gasp sweeps across the dining room. Lorenzo sits close, pouring a vintage wine that costs more than her life. Feels. His dark eyes study her every breath. Meanwhile, a light actually returns to Salvatore's hollow face. The crushing grief lifts. He leans in, desperate to hear about her grandmother's kitchen. Feels. He asks if she remembers the harvest songs that echoed through their hidden village, long before the streets ran red with blood. Feels. He asks how Grazia dried tomatoes under the Mediterranean sun. As Elena answers him, the mask finally falls away. Speaking the rhythm of the old country, she is no longer just an invisible servant. She is Grazia Vitalsli's flesh and blood, Feels, a name that carries the heavy weight of empires. But what do you and I make of Lorenzo? He has been completely silent, dissecting her every syllable like a predator mapping out a hunt. Swirling his dark wine, he levels a cold, Feels, calculated stare that strips a soul down to its terrible core. Feels. So Grazia runs in 1974, he says, actively testing her defenses. My father was a crime family soldier back then. People did not just vanish from the valley without a reason. Elena insists she only wanted a fresh start. Feels. Lorenzo offers this terribly heavy, patient smile. That is a lie, he murmurs. But you have beautiful eyes when you lie, so I will let it slide. She fiercely defends her truth. He slams his glass onto the table. Grazia did not run from boredom. Feels. She ran because she saw, knew, or stole something. Feels. Women didn't just run. They ran because staying guaranteed a quiet funeral. The Don growls Lorenzo's name, a father's stern warning. But Lorenzo leans in, peeling back her layers. That greeting? That isn't bakery slang. That's the blood code of the inner circle. The old families used it to talk right through federal wiretaps while the cops heard dead air. Elena grips the tablecloth, her pulse hammering in her throat. Feels. A baker's daughter might know old folk songs. Lorenzo pushes, studying the guarded look in her eyes. But she doesn't know the formal respect code for a Don. Who are you really? Suddenly, the quiet snaps. The heavy front doors don't just open, explode inward. It's a crude, violent breach of respect. 6 massive Russian enforcers in heavy leather storm right into this sacred, locked-down dining room. Feels. Today, you and I are watching a familiar tragedy unfold. A massive figure daring the room to even He scans the space, fixing on the patriarch's table with a dead Don Salvatore, he mocks. He walks right up. Don Salvatore, he help. His cold stare drags across Elena's. Slowly, Lorenzo stands up. He doesn't just rise, he straightens up like a switchblade snapping open. Heels. He buttons his jacket, painfully slow. Dmitri, Lorenzo says, his voice completely flat. Interrupting my father's dinner is a major health risk. Volov laughs as his enforcers fan out, while the Moretti guards step quietly from the dark. Feels. The temperature in the room just drops. Then Volov reaches for Elena's hair. Lorenzo grabs his wrist. The ugly crunch of bone rings out. Touch her, Lorenzo whispers, his voice dropping into this heartbreaking tender threat. And you lose the hand. Feels, then the arm, then your life. Feels. Anger flashes in Volov's eyes. He yanks his arm, but Lorenzo is locked down in quiet rage.
Slowly.
Acting away, you've gone soft. Slowly, Don's eyes are totally dead. He carries the tired weight of a man who stopped bluffing 30 years ago. She isn't a waitress, Salvatore growls.
She eats at my table. She carries Sicilian blood, Corleone blood.
He stares right through Elena, and in that split second, an old Mafia tragedy breathes again. Feels. Picture the crushing pressure of this moment. Cutting through the dead air, Elena speaks an old underworld proverb. He who disturbs the bread dies of hunger. The words carry a mix of deep sadness and absolute iron. Salvatore freezes, feels, completely caught off guard by this ghost. Then a familiar, brutal darkness crosses his face. Exactly, he mutters to Volov. He waves his hand. Get this trash out of here. In terrifying sync, feels. The Moretti guards raise their guns, just cold men working the brutal gears of the crime family. Feels. Volov eyes the drawn guns, looks at his crew and does the deadly math. He rips his arm away from Lorenzo, keeping this toxic, dead-eyed stare. The polite act is gone, leaving nothing but guarantee of a gang war. We're not done, Moretti, Volov spits. He points a finger right at Elena. And you, kid, you just picked out a casket. He backs out into the cold city night. As the doors slam, a heavy, suffocating quiet swallows the room for 3 brutal seconds. Feels. Slowly, people start breathing again. Lorenzo drops back into his seat, studying her like a puzzle. He has that twitchy paranoia every mob heir inherits. But right now, there's a grim respect in his eyes. You know the old ways, he says quietly. Feels. Who taught you? Elena looks down, crushed by her own past. My father. Lorenzo pauses, a tiny crack in his armor. Your father? I thought your grandmother raised you. Elena doesn't flinch. She did. After they killed my dad. Feels. The silence that follows feels completely different. Less like panic, more like a graveyard. Feels. It's the awful feeling of crossing a line you can't walk back from. Who exactly was your father? The Don asks, his voice shaking with sudden desperation. Elena looks right at both of them. Her survival instincts are screaming. Feels. She spent her entire childhood memorizing Mafia secrets just to survive this exact nightmare. But reality is hitting her hard. She's totally exposed. Volov saw her. The rival boss heard her use the old codes. There's no slipping out the back door now. Feels. The dark won't hide her anymore. Feels. My dad was Santino Vitale, she says, holding her ground like a martyr. But you probably called him the ghost. It's a massive bombshell. Don Salvatore drops his silverware, the loud clatter cutting through the dead quiet. The old boss just stares. Feels. Like a dead man just walked in, his knuckles turning white on the table. Santino, he breathed, sounding like a guy finally catching a after for 20 years. My best friend. My closest advisor. His voice cracks with raw grief. Feels. The man who sold you out, Lorenzo cuts in freezing cold. Feels. Back in 1985, Lorenzo adds, watching his father fall apart. He never betrayed you, Elena snaps back. She's carried this heavy luggage her whole life, waiting to confront the guy who let her dad's name turn to dirt. Feels. He died keeping your secrets, Don Turi. He died keeping you safe. Let's look at this closely, you and I. Those words completely rewrite the Syndicate's dark history. Salvatore is just frozen. He doesn't speak, just grips the table with shaking hands. Feels. Breathing hard and crying. A man crawling out from 20 years of heavy, toxic guilt. Feels. Lorenzo breaks the tension. That's a dangerous story, he warns, turning his face to stone. Claiming Santino didn't turn on the family, that changes everything. Good men died because of 1985. I know what it cost, Elena says quietly. Feels. Then you know if you're lying, you won't walk out of here alive. Lorenzo, the Don barks, his voice thick with hurt. No, Dad, Lorenzo fires back. Oh, we need facts. Vulov knows who she is now. The rival crew heard her use the code. Her normal life is over. Eels. The target is already locked on her. Eels. She's either going to save us or burn us down, and I need answers tonight. Lorenzo glares, hiding his own fear. I'm askings once. What do you have and how? Elena stares right back at him. Eels. She sees the terrible weight of leadership on him. He's playing deadly underworld chess, balancing her life against his crime family survival. My grandmother left me the proof, Elena says softly. Right before she passed. Eels. She poured some red wine and told me the awful truth. Holding that dark secret for 18 years was literally eating her alive. What proof? Lorenzo demands. Eels. A key? Some hidden safe? My dad poured 5 years of his life into a ledger, she explains. He tracked every dirty deal because he knew a rat in your inner circle was talking to the feds. That traitor wanted the smuggling routes for himself. Eels. My dad was days away from saving you when they killed him. A sudden righteous anger hits the Don. They swore to me he stole our cash and ran to Brazil. He never left New York, Elena whispers, twisting the knife. He's in Queens, grave 114, Eels, buried under a fake name so the cartel wouldn't touch his grave. Eels. She went to that cold headstone every Sunday for 30 years, leaving bread and silent prayers, she adds, her voice cracking. The room goes totally quiet. The terrifying mob boss is crying openly now, covering his shaking mouth with his hand. Eels. Seeing a mafia god break down under that kind of massive grief just changes the gravity in the room. Lorenzo quietly breaks the trance. Where's the key? Queens, Elena says, eyes filled with stubborn fire. Soon inside winter coat. Eels. It opens box 404 on Wall Street, sitting there since 1984. Paid for with bakery tips, year after brutal year. Eels. She hid those bank slips in a rusty coffee can and took the secret to her grave. Lorenzo leans back, sharing this quiet, gutted look with his dad. Eels. You and I can practically hear the deadly gears turning in their heads as they realize the mob war has already started. We hit Queens tonight, Lorenzo orders. No, we wait, Salvatore says, sounding so heavy. Vulov is already on the hunt. Eels. He knows her face. His shooters will be at her apartment in minutes. Blind anger just gets you buried. The Don shakes his head. We move at dawn. Lorenzo looks around the dark room, silently doing the math on tomorrow's body count. Eels. Elena can feel the violent storm brewing inside him. He's planning out the coming bloodbath, a guy who naturally just wants to run straight into the fire. But the sheer tragedy of tonight keeps him grounded. Dawn it is. We bring the heavy hitters. Eels. He stands up, fixing his jacket, looking at Elena not like some stranger, but like a deeply wounded survivor he needs to figure out. To him, she's suddenly Mafia royalty. You're staying here tonight, he tells her softly. Eels. With absolute zero room for debate. I've got a bakery shift tomorrow, Elena argues back, clinging so hard to a normal life that's already gone. Eels. Lorenzo studies her for 2 heavy beats. He turns to Arthur, the manager drowning in own sweat. Hey, Arthur, murmurs, his tone perfectly smooth. Elena, tomorrow off. Arthur nods in a panic. Absolutely. Make it permanent, Lorenzo orders. Elena stares at her look at the dining room. 3 years of pouring water, memorizing orders, sparing true self to stay invisible. That safe, quiet illusion is gone. Eels. Tonight, you and I ride into the dark with them. 3 blacked-out vehicles tear through the midnight city, no radio chatter. Just heavy silence and armed men. Elena sits wedged next to Lorenzo. Up front, Don Salvatore rides shotgun. Eels. Staring into the shadows. 20 brutal minutes drag by. Then, without turning, the old Don finally speaks. Your grandmother baked bread on Thursdays. The whole street smelled that rosemary crust. I used to walk by just to breathe it in. Eels. Will this memory expose the rat, or is this a deadly trap? Eels. The tragedy here runs deep. Salvatore, the iron-fisted boss, reveals that his deadliest enforcer, Santino Vitale, harbored a quiet, tragic love for Elena's grandmother. A man who could talk his way out of a gunfight turned soft around a baker's daughter. Eels. She chose a simple schoolteacher instead. But when that teacher passed away, Santino fled to Brooklyn before the dirt even settled. Elena sits frozen in the back seat. The enforcer never spoke a word of his pain. Eels. He simply dragged his broken heart into the dark. Eels. Salvatore drops a crushing truth. For decades, he thought his right-hand man had betrayed the syndicate. His most loyal soldier died protecting them, while Salvatore cursed his memory dirt. Think about the sheer gravity of that guilt. The old boss whispers that this regret is a jagged rock lodged in his chest, a piece of glass he can never swallow, pure suffocating agony. Beside him, Lorenzo gently taps Elena's arm in the dark, offering a quiet anchor in a sea of massive grief. Feels. That brief touch from Lorenzo is not romantic. It is silent solidarity under massive pressure. He swears they will find the truth. Minutes later, they pull up to the fire in Waitress. Cameras track every angle. Dim lanterns cast long shadows across the cold cobblestones. Elena spent years serving wine to rich people, but this is different. This is pure blood money. It looks stunned, but the air is thick with ancient power and generations of buried sins. Feels. Inside, an old maid named Maria waits. Her eyes hold the weight of 100 tragedies. Salvatore barks an order to dress Elena properly and burn her cheap waitress uniform. But Elena refuses. She plants her feet right in the grand foyer and delivers a cold no. The maid blinks at the sheer defiance. Lorenzo freezes midway up the massive staircase. He looks down at her, clearly torn between dangerous anger and deep respect for her wild courage. Feels. Elena holds her ground. Her voice shakes, but it does not break. She tells them the uniform is her anchor. She presses a finger to her cheap plastic name tag. Her grandmother had written her name on the back, a desperate plea to remember her true self in a house of monsters. She declares she is keeping it. The silence in the room turns heavy, suffocating. Nobody speaks. Lorenzo slowly walks down the stairs, stepping uncomfortably close, invading her space until the very air burns. Feels. They stand so close she can see the stubble on his jaw. His dark eyes stare right through her soul. Lorenzo finally murmurs, calling her relentlessly stubborn. She fires back, claiming she is just being practical. Then Lorenzo twists the knife. He whispers that she sounds exactly like her father. That single sentence shatters her defenses. It hits her like a physical punch to the chest. The crushing weight of that comparison leaves her completely breathless. Feels. Look closely at this pain with me. Lorenzo remembers being 12, watching Santino rip apart his plans with harsh truths, and Santino was never wrong. Lorenzo softly explains that in their dark world, a friend is a blood oath. It means the guy you take a bullet for, or the ghost you are doomed to carry until the day you die. Elena stares at him. Her chest aches as she tries to read the sorrow in his eyes. She finally understands the agonizing depth of this endless vendetta. Feels. All her life, Elena ran from men like this, haunted by the blood they always leave behind. Yet, standing drops the masks of a helpless girl. It is a powerful shift, but the sheer terror of it eats at her. Lorenzo quietly tells her to rest before dawn brings chaos, stepping away to give her space. But there is no sleep for her tonight. She lies awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the heavy silence of a house built on graves. Feels. The silence is deafening. No city noise, just the mournful howl of the ocean wind. Her instincts kick in, sensing a shadow lingering on the cold balcony. She steps outside and finds Lorenzo. Jacket off, tie in glass of dark whiskey while staring at the black waves. For a split second, he looks like a broken man, not a ruthless crime boss. He softly warns her to go inside, mentioning snipers. Snipers? Elena shoots back, asking why he is risking his own life out in the open. Feels. Lorenzo gives a bitter smirk, whispering that he is way too stubborn to die. Elena ignores the freezing chill, asking how long he has carried the crushing weight of this empire. Lorenzo drops his guard. He confesses he took over at 19, Feels, right after his father's heart gave out. He tried to fix a few messy problems, and the nightmare simply never ended. Then he asks the heavy question. Before this tragedy swallowed her whole, before the syndicate dragged her into the dark, Feels, what was her quiet dream for the future? Feels. Elena looks away, her voice fragile. She only wanted to save up for a small bakery, just like her grandmother's place. Lorenzo lets out a hollow, tragic laugh at the painful irony. He breaks down the twisted poetry of their bloodlines. Her grandmother fled the mob to bake bread. Her father built an empire of bodies just to keep her safe. And the heir to all this bloodshed? She just wants to bake. The cruel cycle of violence in their families is almost too heavy to carry. Feels. Lorenzo goes quiet. Then he asks why she hid in the shadows when she held the keys to the entire kingdom. Elena finally breaks. She admits how the constant paranoia mentally ruined her grandmother. Every ringing phone, every strange car parked outside, Feels, sparked absolute terror. Elena only wanted a boring, invisible life to escape that inherited trauma. But the fantasy is over. The ruthless Vulov has her face, the syndicate knows her name, and her peaceful sanctuary is reduced to ashes. Now, heals, there is nothing left but basic survival. Heals. So what do you and I make of all this? What is left for her now? Elena whispers that she is just breathing on borrowed time. Lorenzo studies her, a dark respect in his eyes. He murmurs that she blew her perfect cover just to save a dying old man. Where cowards run, she stepped right into the crossfire, but he warns her softly that she is afraid of the wrong ghosts. When she asks what she should really fear, Lorenzo's voice drops to a chilling whisper. Me. Is he her savior or her executioner? Feels. Lorenzo hesitates. The tough exterior slips just a fraction. I don't know yet, he confesses to the cold night air. Most thing I can tell you. Offers a weary, brave smirk. Good. Dishonest men are boring, and against all logic, heals. Lorenzo actually smiles. Not the cold grin of a crime lord, but the smile of an exhausted, lonely guy. For one heartbeat, he is completely human. But their broken world never allows peace. His radio violently crackles to life. Talk, he barks. Heals. A panicked voice floods the channel. Boss, movement out in Queens, Volov's cars. They breached the perimeter 20 minutes ago. Heals. The warmth completely vanishes. The ruthless boss who carried this syndicate on Teen's shoulders is back. Contain it, Lorenzo orders. No shooting, just watch. We move at 5. He turns a dark stare toward Elena. Heals. They are tearing apart your apartment. Elena doesn't even flinch. The key isn't there. Lorenzo pauses. You said you sewed it into your coat. I know what I said. Lorenzo just stares, a profound realization hitting him. Where is it? Slowly, heals. Elena reaches down. She is still wearing those battered, non-slip waitress shoes. The exact same worn-out sneakers she walked in every single day. The one thing that never betrayed her. Heals. She bends down, unlaces her left shoe, and peels the heel back. Hidden inside the rubber, wrapped tight in her grandmother's wax paper, sits a tiny silver key. Lorenzo just stares. 3 brutal seconds of pure dead air. Heals. Then he lets out this hollow sound, half laugh, half groan, burying his face in his hands. You lied. Elena gives a simple shrug. My grandma taught me, never keep your diamonds in the jewelry box. It is the first place they check. Lorenzo drops his hand, heals, looking at her like she is an alien. It is the helpless shock of a hardened boss realizing he is playing checkers, while she has been playing chess all along. Heals. Your grandma, Lorenzo says, completely serious, was a terrifying woman. She was a baker, Elena snaps back. She baked bread and kept receipts. Lorenzo pulls in a ragged breath. He eyes the key, grabs his radio, and makes the call. All right, new plan. Deals. Vulov's men are destroying your apartment for a key sitting right here. They think they are winning, which gives us a small window. He squares his shoulders. You trust me? Elena doesn't blink once. I trust our goals align right now, she replies. Feels heavily guarded. That works, Lorenzo nods. Feels. Let us examine where this narrative turns bitter. That works, Lorenzo agrees. Soon they move. Elena sits in her faded uniform, clutching her grandmother's note as a shield against generational trauma. Heals. Lorenzo wears tactical gear beneath his suit, a walking symbol of La Cosa Nostra violence. Heavy trucks tear through the dark city while Elena grips a cold key. She is haunted by a father buried under a stolen identity. Heals. His hidden truth sits inside a Wall Street bank, waiting to be dragged into the light. Heals. Carrying a ghost for 20 years fractures the soul. The key burns her palm until a sniper's bullet shatters the glass. The cycle of violence demands a toll. Get down! Lorenzo tackles Elena to the floorboards. He shields her trembling frame, driven by the violent instinct bred into crime families. The driver screams, coordinates as backup cars swerve into defense. Give me a count. How many? Lorenzo snaps into his earpiece. His voice dead cold. Heals. 3 cars. Sniper on the roof. They were waiting, boss. Total setup. Lorenzo clenches his jaw, studying Elena, but she refuses. Her breathing stays steady as she confronts the nightmare. You good? He asks softly. Ask me when we stop catching bullets, she whispers. He smirks. Stay down. Do not move. The truck swerves as bullets pierce the roof. Vulov needs them alive. A corpse holds no value. A living hostage is pure bargaining power. Heals. Understanding this dark psychology buys them 40 seconds. 2 blocks out, the driver yells. Lorenzo interrupts. Do not push through. They hold the front. Rip it into the market alley now. The truck drifts into a street packed with vendors. Heals. Total chaos erupts. Panicked screams swallow the engine noise. Lorenzo pulls Elena up. We ditch the car. Stick to me. Head down. They bail into the cold air, melting into the crowd while his men form a shield. Elena mirrors his movement. Heals. Her soul knows falling behind guarantees a lonely, forgotten death. Feels. Her grandmother groomed her for exactly this moment. They run 3 blocks before the radio crackles. Boss. Her apartment's Elena's gaze. They are tearing your life apart. Haven't found it yet. They never will, she whispers. I know, Lorenzo murmurs, noting her grip on the key. But that is not our curse tonight. We must reach Wall Street, and Vulov controls every road. He taps his earpiece. Marco, find a ghost route to the bank, now. Feels. No bridges, no tunnels. Give me something. Heavy silence. Marco finally speaks. The river, 20 minutes by water, gets us there. Lock it in. Lorenzo commands. We move. In 5. Elena stares through the gloom. You casually have a boat of options. Smile surfaces until the reality of mob violence destroying her sanctuary crashes down. My photos, she whispers. My grandmother's old recipes. Feels. All in a notebook on the shelf. Lorenzo senses the profound tragedy of her shattered lineage, offering no false hope. We will come back for the important things, he murmurs. And if they burn it? Then we rewrite it from memory, feels. His tone offers firm comfort, guiding a soul through the underworld. You still carry her lessons up here? They caps his steel that. She nods, gripping the key. The boat ride across the Black River is freezing, feels. Elena braces against the wind, consumed by her father's vendetta, feels. Let's take a closer look at this together, shall we? She only knew her father through mythology and a rusted key. A phantom who spent years burying truth in a city of corruption, assassinated before he could light the match. Now, feels. She crosses black water to inherit his cycle of violence. They hit the Manhattan docks, greeted by silent enforcers. They move through the hollow financial district, footsteps echoing off cold concrete like a heartbeat. Feels. The towering bank sits in absolute darkness. Lorenzo checks his watch, nodding to a shadow guarding the door. Feels. Mr. Castellano, Lorenzo murmurs. Tell me you brought the manager. He is inside, the guard replies. Very cooperative. Elena does not ask how a manager becomes cooperative at 4 in the morning. Feels. She is finally recognizing the agonizing truth. A shadow economy breathes under the streets. A world fueled by blood money and primal fear. She served these men dinner for years, entirely blind to the beast. Feels. The underground vault smells of cold dust and buried secrets. A trembling manager leads them down the corridor, staring desperately at the floor. Feels. Lorenzo slides his key into box 404, stepping back. Elena's trembling hand pushes her silver key home. A heavy click echoes. Lorenzo sets the metal box down. 20 years of agonizing silence breathes in that room. Elena slowly pries it open. No diamonds. Just a battered ledger and a single cassette tape. And then the quiet heartbreak, the handwriting. She recognizes her rushed scrawl instantly. A haunting artifact from one faded birthday card. Feels. His script is painfully small. She brushes the tape, paralyzed by its emotional weight. Lorenzo flips open, scanning decades of Mafia sins. Suddenly, he freezes. Elena. His voice cracks, his cold armor completely shattered. Look at this. He pushes the book toward her, pointing to a rigid column of initials and dates. 1983, 1984, 1985. Feels. Beside the dates sits a haunting trail of shipment numbers and one name. D.V. Vulov, Lorenzo whispers. Elena leans closer. Her father frantically documented FBI meetings, locations, and federal initials. The scope of betrayal is suffocating. At the bottom, underlined twice in plain English against the mob dialect, rests one chilling piece of foreshadowing. Her voice trembles. He will blame the ghost when the time comes. The ghost already knows, feels. The ghost prepared the answer. If you read this, the answer found you. Heavy silence fills the vault. Lorenzo watches her, undone. Your father knew, he whispers. He knew Vulov would frame him. He built this puzzle. He taps the page. As a message for you. Her voice breaks. He died 3 weeks after I was born. Lorenzo never wavers. He knew you would be here. Feels. He knew she would protect the key. He wrote this tragedy for whoever came looking. For you. Notice the chill in that room. She presses her hand against her father's faded ink. She locks the grief away, her eyes hardening with pure vengeance. The tape. We need a player. Marco has one at the safe house, Lorenzo replies gently, wrapping the fragile ledger to carry into the night. Feels. Stick with me here. Lorenzo is calculating, but this revenge is now deeply personal. His radio hisses. Boss, Marco warns. Massive problem. Vulov called an emergency meeting tonight at the Gilded Obsidian. All 5 families. Lorenzo freezes. He knows we have the box, he murmurs. Marco agrees. They found the empty apartment. He knows Elena is with you. Feels. Vulov wants to twist the narrative before the truth bleeds out. Lorenzo studies Elena, his mind running on pure cold logic. He is heading to the gilded obsidian. Lorenzo smirks. Then so are we. His gaze pierces her, recognizing the irony. Every boss Vulov betrayed in 1985 will be there. Every man who lost his freedom because that rat sold them out. Feels. Drop this evidence, and Vulov is dead. Elena frowns. He will have an army. He'll claim we faked the ledger. Lorenzo stares at her. Exactly. That is why you dropped the bomb. Not me. You. The ghost's daughter speaking their old dialect. It is a brilliant trap. They will believe a waitress long before a rival hungry for power. Feels. Elena lets the silence linger. For 3 years, she was a mere phantom pouring wine, quietly absorbing the Dicket's darkest sins. She pictures her father's frantic handwriting. She recalls her grandmother pressing that key into her palm, initiating her into this abyss, whispering, "Remember the name I gave you." A cold, heavy resolve settles in her chest. She looks up. "I will need my uniform pressed," she whispers softly. Feels. Lorenzo nods. Done. Vulov has absolutely no idea his Reaper walks through those kitchen doors tonight. Inside the dim safe house, they press play on an old cassette recorder. The tape hisses, but the voices cut through the thick static. It is Santino Vitali. A crushing wave of inherited grief hits Elena. She has never heard her dead father's voice before this very second. Feels. She assumed a simple recording could not break her. She was profoundly wrong. His voice is deep, measured, thick with that old country dialect. A heartbreaking realization hits her. She sounds exactly like him. She covers her trembling mouth. He speaks to a nervous FBI handler. The agent states the date. November 14th, 1984. 10 short months before they murdered him. Feels. Let's listen to this together. The tape is an archive of betrayal. Santino outlines the underworld's architecture, names, dates, supply lines. He details Vulov buying federal immunity with the blood of rival families. Then comes the psychological crushing point. Santino pinpoints when his boss marked him. He will move against me within the year, he notes, completely detached. He fully understood the mob cycle of violence, demanded his own execution. Feels. I am making this recording as insurance. I refuse federal protection. I have a daughter arriving in 3 outlive me. The tape ends, leaving a suffocating silence. Marco exhales. That is enough to bury him. Lorenzo folds his arms, radiating a quiet, dark rage. That is enough to bury him 10 times over. His eyes are already digging Vulov's grave. Feels. The historical tragedy here is staggering. Every Dade jailed in 1985 fell. Vulov became an informant. Studies her. Vulov used the feds to clear rivals, making your father the perfect sacrifice. Elena finally grasps the systemic rot. Frame the consigliere, let the feds take the crown. He has ruled a stolen empire for 2 decades, Lorenzo scowls. Elena stares at the cassette, a dead man's desperate gift. Feels. We are witnessing the anatomy of a perfect revenge. Elena sees that her father's affection took the form of hidden ledgers and hard evidence to keep her breathing. Clutching the cassette, she is ready to burn this toxic syndicate down. She asks when service starts. Marco replies 8. Vulov arrives at 7:30. Predators always claim their space early. Feels. Elena pictures a brutally elegant entrance. They strike at 7:45 from the kitchen. Touching her name tag, she craves the psychological dominance of standing over Vulov before he even processes the threat. A quiet, terrifying power. Mesmerized, Lorenzo whispers it is either sheer brilliance or absolute suicide. Elena softly notes it can be both. A dark smirk crosses Lorenzo's face. Feels. The machinery of war engages. Lorenzo orders Marco to dress the hitman in chef whites, turning the restaurant into a vault cells before Vulov arrives. Lorenzo says that his father will play the broken lion, embodying 2 decades of grief. They spend hours designing this trap. While Lorenzo orchestrates the bloodshed, Elena quietly carves the crime ledger into her very soul. Feels. She internalizes every date and corrupt payout. Later, Lorenzo slides a coffee toward her, his eyes heavy. He offers a cold warning. If Vulov falls tonight, the cost is absolute. Her anonymity vanishes. The shield drops, and her true identity will be exposed to the underworld forever. Feels. The criminal underworld will realize Santino's daughter lived, holding their darkest sins. Her quiet life is over. Lorenzo studies her, asking what she actually wants once the violence ends. Elena hesitates, visualizing her family's forgotten vineyard in Sicily. She simply wants a peaceful existence, leaving this generational cycle of blood far behind. Feels. She just wants a life in the open. But then Lorenzo shatters her paradigm. He reveals his father purchased that Sicilian estate decades ago out of profound survivor's guilt. It is hers. Elena freezes. Lorenzo admits Salvatore spent 23 years scouring the city, haunted by Santino's final mention of a child. She was just completely invisible. Feels. There is a bitter irony here. She found him first. For 3 years, she poured wine for the sociopaths who destroyed her family. The past is escapable. Yet, instead of crumbling under the trauma, Elena weaponizes her grief. She tells Lorenzo it is time. He nods, bearing the emotional weight of his lineage, knowing the night demands absolute cold-blooded focus. Feels. He grips her hand for 3 seconds before rising to start the war. Inside the dining room, the tension is suffocating. The staff sweats, setting the stage for the city's deadliest predators. The lighting feels beautifully mournful. At 7:22, Elena pushes through the kitchen doors in her faded uniform. The head chef just stares at her, as if a ghost had materialized. Feels. Benoit stammers. She was fired. Elena silences him. She holds his gaze, delivering a grim omen. Regardless of the screams tonight, the staff must hide. Trembling, Benoit asks who she really is. A dark, knowing smile appears. She is just the waitress. Grabbing her tray, she pushes into the crowded dining room. Feels. The crime lords file in, claiming their velvet thrones. Elena moves through them like a phantom, pouring wine, waiting for the architect of her trauma. Vulov finally swaggers in at 7:34, pulling darkness in with him. He projects the toxic arrogance of a man who owns the Mafia. He takes center stage while his enforcers lock the perimeter. Feels. Vulov's blinding ego renders the service staff entirely invisible, a fatal flaw Lorenzo predicted. Then Salvatore arrives. The aging Don looks utterly shattered, crushed by the weight of his friend's confession. He slumps into his chair in mournful silence, instantly shifting the room's atmosphere. Standing in the shadows, Elena observes Vulov laughing at something cruel, carelessly throwing back his vodka. Feels. Vulov sits there, intoxicated by false victory. But you and I know the trap is already sprung. Lorenzo's hitmen are positioned, the exits are sealed. Elena carries her father's ghost in her pocket, bearing the entire syndicate's sins. Recalling Santino's unnervingly calm final words, she transforms her grief into power. Gripping the tray, she marches straight to Vulov's table and shatters the atmosphere, slamming the bread down, an act of beautifully unspeakable defiance. Feels. She forces his attention to the table, snapping his focus. Vulov glances up. It takes 2 agonizing seconds for his brain to process the ghost before him. You can physically see the panic hit. Elena stares him down, entirely cold. Announcing dinner is served from Santino Vitali. She lifts the silver dome. No meal. Just the ledger, the cassette, and a dead fish. Pure, poetic payback. Feels. Vulov turns the color of ash, his hands visibly shaking. Elena steps back, her voice drifting across suffocating silence. She delivers a quiet line in Old Italian, the ancient toll for a traitor. The dining room completely freezes. Think about the psychological weight of this. Every seasoned crime lord at those tables felt the cold edge of her words. Feels. All oxygen left the room when she pointed directly at the architect of her family's ruin. She systematically exposed the betrayal, how Vulov traded their smuggling routes to federal agents in 1983. Feels. And how he slaughtered Santino Vitali just to bury his own treason. 2 decades of ruling a stolen empire. Vulov's scrambled to his feet, screaming for her execution, yet no one even flinched. Then the kitchen doors burst open. Feels. Lorenzo emerged holding a shotgun, flanked by 6 hitmen. The waitstaff dropped their trays, drawing firearms. The jaws of the trap snapped entirely shut. Feels. The criminal elite sat paralyzed. Lorenzo handed the tape player to Caruso, a rival Don who sacrificed 14 months to a federal cell back in 1986 because of corrupted intel. Lorenzo instructed him to hit play. Feels. He established the timeline, an audio recording from November 14, 1984. Santino on tape dropped Dmitry Vulov's name a dozen times. Caruso studied the machine, locked his gaze onto the traitor, and slammed the button. Feels. The haunting confession of a dead man echoed across the mahogany. Feels. Elena watched the sheer terror wash over the man who had dismantled her life. You could practically observe his psyche fracturing, realizing a dead man's words had been slowly poisoning his legacy since 1984. Feels. The untouchable kingpin was finally choking on the same helplessness he forced on his victims. Yet Elena felt zero triumph. just a profound psychological stillness. The generational curse was breaking. Once the recording finished, feels. Caruso violently smashed the player against the heavy dining table. Feels. Caruso maintained a dead stare into Vulov's eyes. It wasn't rage, but the hollow realization of serving time to protect an informant. He quietly asked if his name lived in those government files. Surrounded by loaded weapons, Vulov looked at Elena, feels, standing perfectly still in the storm. He pathetically whispered that it was strictly business, his absolute end. Then Salvatore rose. Limping across the marble, the old Don stopped before Elena, feels, gazing at her as though witnessing his murdered brother's ghost, feels. Salvatore pulled a steak knife from the table, offering her the ultimate revenge for Santino. Elena studied the steel, flashing back to that lonely fake grave in Queens. She recalled her grandmother paying $50 annually for 3 decades, just to keep the truth alive in the shadows. Gripping the handle, she raised the weapon and buried the blade deep into the mahogany wood. The brutal thud echoed, stripping the breath from every hardened killer present. Feels. True power often lies in the refusal to participate. Lena looked at the assembly and declared she was not a butcher. She carried the genuine Vitali legacy, blood far too pure to soil with the life of a traitor. Feels. Meeting the gaze of every apex predator in that room, men who now clearly understood the betrayal, she surrendered the informant to them. She turned her back on Vulov, walking straight toward Lorenzo. Behind her, feels, the restaurant erupted into a symphony of violence as 5 syndicates claimed their pound of flesh. Feels. She didn't flinch at the sounds of absolute destruction. To truly break the cycle of violence, you have to let the fire consume itself. Lorenzo caught her, holding her tightly, as if anchoring her to reality. He whispered that the decades-long nightmare had finally ended. Hearing those ruthless men finally attach honor to her father's name, the vault key felt heavy in her pocket, but she told Lorenzo this wasn't over. One final emotional debt still required settling. Feels. You and I have seen this trope before, but here the cinematic parallel hits deeper. She looked at Salvatore, an aging Don waking from a 2-decade curse, whispering she would show him his friend's true grave. By dawn, they reached St. Michael's Cemetery in Queens, just 4 figures drifting across the silent grounds. They stopped at a forgotten headstone in row 7, marked only by a stranger's name, Feels. The weathered stone read Giovanni Ferraro, 1948 to 1985, beloved and remembered. Her grandmother chose those specific words to hide trauma in plain sight because Santino's and Vitali really was beloved. In her entire life, she had only visited this quiet place 3 times, always at the break of dawn. She knew every fracture in that cold stone, every uneven patch of dirt. The psychological weight of that fake grave was as familiar as her own pulse. Feels. The exhausted syndicate boss leaned heavily on his cane, staring at the physical manifestation of a lie. In that instant, he finally grasped the agonizing, generational toll of hiding a loved one for 30 years. Salvatore stood in total silence, Feels, and Elena let him drown in it. Cemetery quiet is simply how trauma speaks to ghosts. When his voice finally broke the cold air, speaking Santino's name, the ruthless mobster armor shattered. He was just a broken man, Feels, realizing he swallowed a bitter lie for decades. Feels. He confessed to the earth, admitting that dismantling his best friend's legacy was the darkest moral failing of his life. Speaking directly to the dirt, he told Santino his daughter was standing right there, Feels, carrying his eyes and her grandmother's absolute resilience. He called her the bravest soul he knew for facing down a room of loaded guns. As the old criminal begged for forgiveness, Elena felt a lifetime of suffocating, inherited grief wash away. Feels. She reached out, pressing her bare palm to the freezing stone. Feels. She whispered a quiet promise to the earth. She would return with a new headstone bearing his real name, letting the world finally witness his truth. Driving away in the morning light, Salvatore sat completely silent, Feels. Yet halfway across the Brooklyn Bridge, the old man reached back and gently squeezed Elena's knee. Coming from a hardened king of organized crime, that tiny cinematic gesture carried the weight of endless apologies, Feels. It communicated every single emotion a broken patriarch could never say out loud, Feels. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the true psychological cost of vengeance? Elena held his hand crossing the water, finally grasping her peace. The real-world fallout, however, was violently swift. When 5 crime families want you gone, Feels, you simply vanish. Vulov's entire empire evaporated within 72 hours. Betrayed by his own toxic hierarchy, His lieutenants ran straight to the authorities to save their own skin. Feels. It is the perfect cinematic tragedy, absolute karma delivered by the very system he built. Feels. The structural aftershocks of that night tore right through the city's corruption. Dirty agents lost their badges and pensions instantly. The docks were reclaimed, and working-class men finally saw the wages stolen from their hands. And Vulov? Feels. Elena never even asked how his character arc concluded. She left him pinned to a table surrounded by the wolves he trained. For her, that cycle of violence was permanently closed. Meanwhile, Feels. Lorenzo's attorneys moved like ghosts through the legal system. Within 2 weeks, Elena claimed her rightful inheritance, $52 million, a quiet, dusty vineyard in Palermo. And most crucially, a spotless legal identity, Feels, finally worthy of the heavy psychological legacy she had carried in the shadows since childhood. Feels. Picture this scene with me, a quiet Tuesday morning in the Hamptons. Elena sat over coffee, scanning the dark inheritance of her new Mafia legacy. She absorbed every documented sin, closed the folder, and looked up. Lorenzo was watching her with that heavy, Feels, piercing cinematic gaze, trying to read her soul. "Well," he asked softly, "she didn't miss a beat. The dockworkers fund.
Transfer it today.
Not tomorrow now." Lorenzo hesitated. "Elena, that is $11 million. She didn't blink. Feels. "I know exactly where it comes from," she replied. "I know the families who buried sons in '85 because of a rat." Feels. "Those men took the hardest hit. They get paid first," she stated, voice entirely steady. "Then the Ridgewood School, then the hospital. We will figure out the rest." Lorenzo simply watched her process this moral redistribution. Feels. "What about the Palermo vineyard? The deed transferred Friday." Elena nodded slowly. "I know nothing has grown there in 20 years. Lorenzo pressed the issue. "The farmhouse is a ruin, Elena. The roof is completely caved in." She just stared back. Feels. It was that cold, unbreakable expression she carried now. The kind of profound silence that murders an argument without a single spoken word. Feels. Lorenzo surrendered to the quiet tension. "I know exactly what I am choosing," Elena whispered. "I want the dirt, the sweat. I want to plant something clean, knowing no blood paid for the soil." She let out a heavy breath. Feels. "I want to bake bread where the wind smells like lemons. That means everything to me." Lorenzo stood and walked toward her. As the morning light hit his face, the visual storytelling stripped away the monster. Feels. This was the real human beneath the Mafia myth, a quiet ghost haunting lonely kitchens, rainy cars, and silent graves. Feels. "I met with the commission yesterday," he told her. "I said the war is over, the Moretti family is going completely legitimate." Reaching inside his jacket, he added, "I told them the Prince of New York is walking away." Elena froze. "You really said that?" Feels. "I meant it." And then, carrying that aching, heavy sincerity, Lorenzo sank to one knee. He opened a velvet box revealing an antique 1920s platinum ring, a quiet survivor of generational trauma just like them. "My grandmother's," he murmured. Feels. "She always said the best things grow from the oldest dirt." Feels. Elena looked from the ring to the man holding it. This was the same enforcer who threw himself off a roof to save her, the man who walked her through a bleeding city, the syndicate boss who bared his soul by a false grave, the king who watched her burn his toxic empire to the ground, yet still looked at her like absolute royalty. "I am done being a Don," Lorenzo whispered. It wasn't just a soft delivery. It was the raw, broken truth of a man surrendering his toxic masculinity. "I want to be a husband." Feels. "I want to wake up in Palermo," he pleaded. "I want to rebuild that roof. I want to fail at growing grapes until I finally get it right. I want our home to smell like your grandmother's kitchen." He looked at her. Feels. Completely stripped of his underworld armor. "Elena Vitali, let me be the man you never have to hide from." Elena closed her eyes. She remembered being 7, absorbing midnight whispers. The hidden key, her father's confession tape, Feels, the fake names on cold tombstones. Those metaphorical ghosts were finally quiet. Her real legacy was just beginning. Feels. Elena answered in the only way that resolved this beautiful cinematic tragedy. "Tu sei l'aria che respiro," she whispered. "You are the air I breathe." A genuine, unguarded smile broke across Lorenzo's face. Feels, shattering the ruthless mob boss persona forever. "Is that a yes?" he asked softly. "Yes," she laughed, "and when you watch this scene, that sound is pure freedom. You can practically feel 2 decades of agonizing trauma washing away in the morning light." Feels. He pulled her in, breaking the tension. Somewhere off camera, Arthur was weeping, and Marco was leading the cheers. Feels. In the corner, Don Salvatore quietly broke bread, dipped it in oil, and raised a silent toast. In La Cosa Nostra, Bread is a blood promise. 3 months later, the narrative shifts. Elena stands inside a stone farmhouse in Palermo. Feels. Hands dusted with flour, the sweet lemon wind pulling the curtains. Outside, Lorenzo curses at a broken roof, realizing personal redemption requires actual sweat. The vineyard is nothing but dirt and hope. Inside, Feels. Elena studies her grandmother's recipe book, not the original. The syndicate burned that one back in Queens, hunting for ghosts. Feels. Elena was rewriting it entirely from memory. Every measurement flawlessly restored by a mind that never dropped a detail. She finally had all the time in the world. Pressing her flour-dusted hand to the paper, she left a white print, a physical signature, Feels, mirroring her grandmother's. It was proof she remained tethered to a bloodline of survivors. You and I know she did not find love and justice by accident. She earned this peace because an old woman hid a key in a coffee can for 30 years, Feels, left bread on a false grave, and whispered dark survival secrets to a child, Feels. That old forgotten language was breathing again. The bread was warm. The endless toxic cycle of Mafia bloodshed was finally broken. And the true thematic feast? It was just beginning.